Hey there, it's Mark with Mark's Astro Journey. Comet C 2023-A3 Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is still around. And for some of us, seeing a comet or taking a picture of it's a pretty exciting thing. Here's a picture posted on Wikipedia from October 17th of the comet. But why are people saying it's so unique to see this comet? Where did it come from and when will it be back? These three questions are kind of related to each other. It's unique for us to see it because it's believed to have an orbital period around 80,000 years. That's a long time, right? Some astronomers think it may even be the first time it has passed through the inner solar system. It's believed to have originated in the Oort cloud. If you check out NASA's site, they describe the Oort cloud as a huge spherical shell of icy objects surrounding our solar system. They say some of the icy objects in this large bubble surrounding the solar system are the size of mountains and probably larger. NASA's site describes the Oort cloud as theoretical, as they've not really ever observed any objects directly in the Oort cloud. Based upon the trajectory and orbital path of comets, scientists hypothesize the existence of the Oort cloud. So will this comet return and when? Well, it might return, but with an orbital period of 80,000 years, probably not in our lifetime. There's even the possibility that the comet could be ejected at some point. Scientists indicate that long period comets are somewhat unpredictable. So why does the name of this comet have two names embedded within it? Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. Well, it was first imaged in January of 2023 by the Purple Mountain Observatory in Nanjing, China. Thus the first part of the two-part name, Tsuchinshan. Then it was imaged by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, also known by the acronym ATLAS, in South Africa in February of 2023, thus the second part of the two-part name, ATLAS. So how would a person go about locating this comet in the night sky or any other comet that appears in the future? A local weatherman gave the following tip. He said, and this is relevant to where I live, Southern Indiana in USA. From your location, it's probably different. But he said the comet's typically visible, in this case, after sunset in the western sky just above the horizon. So his suggestion was to find Venus in the sky, then look slightly to the right and above that, and take your phone, take a night photo. Your phone sensor is much more sensitive than the human eye, and it'll pick up the comet if you use that night photo setting. Then you can hold your phone up as a reference and look at the sky to where Venus is at. And it'll give you an idea of where the comet's actually located in the sky. And then once you let your eyes adjust to the night sky, after some time, you might be able to see it with the naked eye. Another suggestion is to use an app on your phone like Sky Guide. You can search for the comet in the list of the best objects to observe that night. Then the app uses the compass of your phone to show you where the object is at in the sky from your location. You just hold your phone up and kind of move around in the sky until you see that object in front of you. And so this is a really easy way to locate an object in the sky. And here's an example of how the Sky Guide app shows you some of tonight's best astronomical objects for observation. In this example, if you select the comet, it shows where it is currently at in the sky. And you can see an example of that in this screenshot. Then if you click on, there's like a little icon beside the comet. If you click on that icon, it'll show details about observing the comet, such as when it rises and sets, as well as its exact coordinates. And those coordinates can be used by a go-to mount for a telescope to navigate to that comet or that object. Another tool is a website named theskylive.com. There's a link to the popular objects for that night at the very top of the page, right when you go there. If you click on the comets link, then you'll see a picture of where the comet is in a star chart. But to be able to use this, you probably have to be somewhat familiar with using star charts. So it might be more useful to people who have amateur astronomy as a hobby. A great feature of some of these tools is they give the current right ascension and declination for the comet's position. This helps anyone using a telescope to plug in those coordinates into their go-to mount or some software they have on their computer it will reposition their go-to mount so that their telescope is pointed towards the comet. Is it possible to see the comet with the naked eye? In my case, I focused on imaging the comet instead of visual observation. But many have reported they were able to see it after letting their eyes adjust to the night sky in locations where there wasn't much light pollution. So when was it best to see the comet with the naked eye? Well, it was closest to the sun on September 27th of 2024. It's harder to observe the comet when it's closest to the sun, as the brightness of the sun would make it kind of difficult really to see, and it would be during the daytime, right? So it needs to get a little distance away from the sun for us to try to observe it visually. On October 9th of 2024, the comet brightened to a magnitude of -4.9, making it one of the brightest comets in the past century. The comet was closest to Earth on October 12th, 2024, at a distance of 44 million miles. But as of November 2nd, the comet had dimmed to below magnitude +6. So it should no longer be visible to the naked eye very easily. And since it's getting further and further away from us as time goes on, it's most likely that now you'll have to have binoculars or a telescope to observe the comet. If you plan to take a picture of this comet or another comet, what do you think would be the best camera exposure time? Would you choose 15, 30, 60 seconds, or maybe longer? In my case, I found that 30 seconds actually was a good exposure time and gave pretty good results. I also did it 120 seconds, but here's my final image with 30-second exposures from October the 19th. So what kind of gear do you plan to use to take a picture of the comet? Are you going to use your phone? Maybe you have a DSLR camera, or maybe you even have a telescope and astrophotography gear. I'd like to hear your comments. Post a comment about your setup. In my case, you can see my setup behind me. I'm using the Williams Optics RedCat 61 Petzval refractor. I also have the ZWO-ASI 2600 mm Pro camera, and I have the Optolong 2-inch filter set. I'm not using the narrowband filters, but rather the broadband filters, LRGB in this case. And I also have ZWO's filter wheel and automatic focuser. If you do have a telescope, do you plan to use a color camera, or do you think it's better to use a monochrome camera with filters? Some people feel like they can bring up more data with monochrome, but I don't know about this case what your thoughts are. So leave a comment about what you think is the best option. So if you plan to take images of the comet, like say an hour or an hour and a half of images, and then try to process all that data you collected to produce a final image, do you think it's going to be easy? I don't. After I've worked on it some, in my opinion, easy is the wrong word. I would describe it as tedious. It's rewarding, but it's not easy. The reason I say that is because the comet is moving at a different speed in relation to the stars and the other objects in the background behind it, relative to us. So now it presents the challenge that we want a crisp image of the comet and its tail, and we also want pinpoint stars in our final image. If we focus on alignment of the comet only, then our stars get distorted. If we focus on aligning the stars only, then the comet gets distorted. So this presents a new challenge where we have to not only process the comet data separately from the stars and the stars on their own, but also the alignment is an extra exercise because of the movement of the comet. Please leave a comment about, kind of the general idea of how you do processing of data you collected on a comet. And it could be that your way is much faster, much better, uses the best tool there is, or you found an excellent tutorial. And that'll help other people that might have been interested in this video about comets, and maybe they can learn something from your experience, as well as myself. So to process the data I captured on the comet, I used a combination of tools. I realized there are multiple ways to do this. I'm still learning. There's probably a lot I need to learn more, other better tools or better techniques. There's tutorials. Maybe sometime in the future I'll be able to go through some of those additional ones and pick up some more tips. So I'm not intending to give a tutorial necessarily. I'm just mentioning a few options that are out there. So someone else who maybe is newer to the hobby and is wanting to process, comet data they captured can leverage some of these tools. So I used several tools together. I used Star Exterminator to remove the stars. I used Graxpert for gradient reduction. I also used AstroPixel Processor for calibration, analysis, registration, normalization, and stacking. and then PixInsight for post-processing. AstroPixel processor has a special option for alignment by a comet or a single star. And to use this stacking method, there are a couple key options a person has to choose. Then, as we know, there are many other options you can tweak to your preferences, but under analysis, there's an option to disable star analysis. Since we're trying to align on the comet, it's not really that helpful for APP to analyze the stars and their procedures, evidently. And so here's a picture of what those options look like. Then under registration, for registration mode, we can choose Comet/1 star. This is going to tell APP to do its registration based upon the location of the comet in each of the subframes. And you can see that here. APP is actually going to stop and prompt you to choose the center of the comet in like the first subframe. And then I think what it does is there's a checkbox on there to automatically detect the center of the comet in each subframe. It'll try to identify the center on its own if you leave that checked. But then if it has trouble, or it's, I guess maybe the image quality is not as good as the others, it'll prompt you to choose the center of the comet. What I found about that selection of the center is it's not the fact that your mouse was precisely dead on the center. If you get generally in the center of the comet, APP seems to have some algorithm to analyze where you clicked because it notices, the contents of those pixels, and it centers its little selector over the comet fairly well. I started to look into PixInsight's tools for calibration, stacking, and comet alignment, but I don't normally use PI for stacking, so I'm going to need some more time to go through some tutorials probably to better understand those tools. Here under the script menu, you can see there's a script named Weighted Batch Preprocessing, and here's a picture of that. So they have an option to go ahead and do this initially before you use their Comet alignment script. And then here's the dialog for the Weighted Batch Preprocessing. Notice also that under the process menu, there's an option for Comet alignment. So here's a picture of that. Here's the dialog for Comet alignment. You can see some of the options you would choose after you load your subframes of the Comet images. It seems that while WBPP is not really required for Comet alignment, it can be advantageous to do WBP first to apply weighting to the individual subframes. This seems to offer better results in the Comet alignment tool, although not required per the documentation in PixInsight. So when I first just took a look at this, I found that WBPP flagged a lot of my flats or flat darks, raising a lot of warnings, and it seems to categorize and group the calibration frames in ways I don't fully understand yet. I use Nina's flat frame wizard to capture my flats, but PI's WBPP seems to think that the flats, for example, for one filter, the red filter, were not all the same and was grouping them in all these different groupings, which made no sense to me as the wizard in Nina, once it settles in on what is the right setting for a flat, and you've given it the instructions of how many to take, it just takes all those flats. It doesn't sit there and say, oh, well, in one flat, I'm going to use this many seconds of exposure, and the next flat, I'm going to use a different exposure. As far as I know, it's fairly reliable. So I'm not real sure what's going on there. I'm probably going to have to do a little learning, better understand that before I try to use that WBPP tool. And maybe there's some other steps I have to take to make the flats even more precise. AstroPixel processor, it doesn't get hung up on my flats and make all kinds of complaints about the flats or the dark flats. So I don't really understand what the difference is there. I'll have to learn about that before I try to use that tool in PixInsight. And PI was also saying that for my lights, I had no corresponding flat for some of the lights, which also dumbfounded me a little bit because when I do my light capture, I do those as a Nina sequence at night. I don't sit around like tweaking the exposure and the gain and the brightness settings or the field of the region of interest or the image size, the percentage of the image size. I just set that sequence up and let it run. I noticed that PI and that WBPP dialog seem to have a lot of hypersensitivity to the statistics about exposure, gain, and brightness level, and it wasn't making sense to me. I don't know if I accidentally mixed a file in there and I didn't realize I mixed a file in. You know, normally I keep my sets of data separately, but I got a little confused by all that, and I decided, okay, I don't have time to get bogged down in going back and recapturing lights or recapturing flats and darks to make that WBPP dialog happy. It was just coughing up all kinds of warnings. So I definitely have some learning there. Maybe some of the people who use that all the time, if you're one of those people, maybe you've been through that experience and you could post a comment about, is there a lesson learned there that you found that made PixInsight happier about all of your flats, darks, and light frames. I'm just going to give a quick rundown on my processing sequence. In PixInsight, if you have Star Exterminator installed, there's a process batch option on the dialog that opens. I use this to take all my subframes for each channel and remove all the stars. And it'll let you create folders, and it separates out the starless and the star images in folders. Then I used Astropixel processor to take the starless subframes, and I stack those using the Comet only option that I mentioned earlier, where you disable the star analysis and you choose Comet 1 star for registration mode. Also within Astropixel processor, you can either stack the stars only subframes, or you can just stack the full subframes and then extract the stars out of it using Star Exterminator to get your stars only image. Of course, once you've done the Comet alignment and stacking, you have to remember in APP to undo those settings you changed that support Comet alignment. I use Grexpert for gradient reduction, and I did this also on the starless and stars subframes because the moon was out and I had a lot of gradient and light pollution to deal with. Once I had my stacks by channel for the Comet without the stars, and then vice versa for the stars without the Comet, I just went through my normal PI processing. This usually includes things like channel combination, image solving, spectrophotometric color calibration, noise reduction, deconvolution, stretching, curves, and then various options for bringing out the detail in the Comet coma and the Comet tail. So then once all of that work is done, then we have to combine our Comet data with our star data to get a final image. And one of the issues with this is cropping. I'm using dithering almost always. So you do have to deal with the fact that when you dither and you do your stacking, you know how you end up with this image that has these odd borders all around the edge because the individual subframes, as it's stacked, quite a few of them, create these little pixel-free sections on the margins or the edges of your image. So that is one other thing that's key, is to get the crop the same on your Comet only stacks and the crop the same on your star only stacks before you combine them together. So just to quickly go through the images I captured, on October 19th of this year, I captured 30-second exposures, and I captured 32 subframes for each of the 4 channels, luminance, red, green, and blue. So I had 16 minutes per channel, a total of 64 minutes in light frames. And then of course I captured flats, flat darks, and darks for calibration purposes. And here you can see the image, the final image that was produced from that session. On October 23rd, I did another imaging session. This time I used 120-second exposures. So I captured basically 9 of each of the channels, 9 subframes for luminous, red, green, and blue. So a total of 18 minutes per channel, and a total of 72 minutes for all the light frames together. Again, I used the same set of calibration frames I mentioned previously, and here you can see that image. On November 1st, I also went with 30-second exposures on this night, and I captured a total of 52 for each channel, luminance, red, green, and blue. Those were 30-second again, so that's 26 minutes per channel, with a total of 104 minutes of light frames, and the same set of calibration frames I mentioned before. And here we can see that image. So it's fairly easy to capture the subframes for Comet over, say, an hour and a half. But I wouldn't say it's easy to use the data to produce a final image. I find it to be quite tedious again. What do you think? If you've done the same thing, I hope you'll post your comments so we can learn from your experience. You may have great ideas or a much easier way to do things. I actually have data captured on several other nights for this comet. I've not touched it yet. I hope to eventually get around to processing that data, and it might be a good opportunity to learn how to use PixInsight's tools, the WBPP tool and the Comet Alignment tool that they have, and see what kind of results I get with those. If you enjoy videos on amateur astronomy and astrophotography, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and follow along with my journey learning this hobby. By having more subscribers, it doesn't just help the channel gets more visibility and can possibly help other people who are entering into the hobby. So until the next part of the adventure, I'm wishing you clear skies.